The Love Life and Lose Weight podcast will teach you the art and science of changing your habits around food. I'm your host, advanced certified weight and life coach, Heather Beardsley. I've helped hundreds of women just like you figure out how to stop dieting, lose weight, and love life on the journey to goal weight and beyond. Hey, welcome to episode 26, Selective Ignoring. Selective ignoring is a practice that I highly recommend you develop for any goal, and it can be especially helpful with your weight loss. And I'll spend the next few minutes explaining how to, first of all, what it is. Number two, how it's useful. And number three, how you can start to develop your practice of a selective ignoring. So I'm going to start with, let's orient ourselves to the practice of being human first. You know, we have these bodies and we take in the world through our senses, seeing it, hearing it, tasting it, touching it, smelling it. And all of this information comes into our brain and where it meets, our stories about who we are, what we want, our subconscious beliefs, things that have happened in the past are all kind of stored there, and everything gets kind of processed in your brain. And this is just a constant process, and unless you're sleeping, right? And even then, your brain is processing what happened that day. So it's a constant state of processing input that your brain is going through. And we all know that we have automatic thinking where we just think a thought and it's not necessarily on purpose. Just it's like a thought is offered to us. And in the context of weight loss, a lot of times our thoughts are focused on noticing when we have urges to eat and refining the practice of only eating when we're hungry and being able to stop at enough despite any automatic thinking about it. And we know if we've been overweight and we've had trouble losing, well, more than likely you have a habit of emotionally overeating or just having a habit of overeating. So this process involves changing the habit of doing that. So, okay, to change any habit, we have to be aware of the thoughts that we're thinking. And usually when we're changing overeating habits, that means listening or watching for thoughts like, let's keep going. I just want more. It just tastes so good. Things like that. Because those thoughts drive the action of overeating when they maybe make us feel permissive or like we don't care about our weight loss goal in the moment. So this is thought work. And thought work is a really important component of weight loss. It's an essential component that up until very recently just wasn't taught. We used to think of ourselves as like knowing that we needed to eat less, committing to doing that, and then expecting ourselves to just follow our new proclamation to eat less, and then getting really frustrated when we didn't understand why we couldn't just follow our wishes, our inner manager's wishes to just stop doing that thing that we've been doing, which is overeating. So this is why thought work is so important, because thought work is a habit. There's patterns of thinking that are deeply ingrained. And I think it's probably a good habit to just know that whatever habits of thinking you have around food, that they serve a purpose, even if you can't quite on the surface figure out what those are. Emotional overeating when you're upset, say, or anxious, gives you relief in the moment, even though it's opposed to your other goal, which is to lose weight. And so in order to kind of get those two aligned, we've got to figure out how to meet your need to process feeling anxious, hopefully find a way to bring that tension in your nervous system down so that you can access your planning brain to remember, like, hey, eating more food doesn't actually help me with my anxiety. So this is the space in which selective ignoring comes in. It's part of thought work. It's a practice that can help you, just like yoga. So selective ignoring can only take place from an intentional space around your thinking. I mean, if you think about it, if you aren't aware of what you're thinking, you can't try to ignore certain thoughts because the thoughts are just thinking you, right? We all used to, before we were introduced to thought work, we just thought like the world happened. And that's why we felt the way we did and why we did the things we did. We just thought everybody else in different circumstances in the world caused things to happen within us. But, cognitive behavioral conditioning tells us that feelings and our actions all come from how we choose to think about the world, whether those thoughts are intentional or more automatic, whether you're aware of them or not aware of them. So this awareness phase is really critical because being aware of how you're thinking gives you a space to slow down, pause, and then choose what you want to do when you think thoughts, where you can like sort of look at the thought and ask yourself, does this help me or not? Now, you won't know the answer to that question until you've defined ahead of time the end result, which is why, weight loss, when we plan, is so much more predictable and so much more satisfying. Now, is it possible to lose weight without planning for it? Of course. I think we've all had that experience, but we don't want to just, spin the roulette wheel and just hope our life takes another turn that creates some weight loss for us, right? Usually it's what it is it's just a big distraction that happens. But we can use it as an example. We can take like parts of like unintentional weight loss and see that it always involves some selective ignoring that's happened, even if you weren't aware of it. So let me just give you an example. The first time I remember losing weight, it was the summer I was like 16 or 17. I left home for the summer and I went to another state and I worked for the summer at a resort place. And my life was completely turned upside down. I mean, I was thrown into a completely new environment. I was out of my family house without any of my family members around. I had to make new friends. I had to figure out how to do a brand new job. I had to, create a new social life and figure out how to kind of like do life on my own as a 16, 17-year-old. I turned 17 that summer. And, my goal in going out there was to just kind of shake off who I felt I was in my little small hometown. And it worked beautifully because it was like an immersion into a completely different life. And as such, I got so busy with those parts of learning all of those things I talked about, how to get to the post office. I mean, my God, back then, like you had to go and get like rolls of quarters and put them in a payphone to call home. I think I probably called home in 3 months, like maybe, I don't know, 6 times. That's it. So I didn't, you would get a message and you'd have to call somebody back and you didn't know if they'd be home. There was no TVs out there, no nothing. Anyway, I came back home that summer and my clothes were hanging off of me because out of my home environment, I was very distracted with so many other things. I was selectively ignoring them, not on purpose to try to lose weight, but just because I was immersed in this whole different life that required my attention on other things. So I was less focused on food. I was selectively ignoring food. And I was getting all my dopamine and all my feel good hormones and stuff other ways, like making new friends and having fun and going to the beach and working hard, actually. So this is a good example. Maybe you can go back into your life and remember a few times. Maybe it was like a very stressful time in which you lost weight. That's another example of selective ignoring. Primary stress takes the predominant amount of your attention, and food becomes way, way down in importance on the importance scale for you. And you might have lost weight then. But they all have in common this idea of selective ignoring. So what I want you to do to develop your practice of selective ignoring is to use it as a way to lose weight in your day-to-day. So for example, I want you to define, and hopefully you've done this, your goal for the month. I like to do it month to month. Like, how much do you want to lose in a month? You want to gut check your goal as something that feels doable, but it will be enough of a stretch that you've got to pay attention, because that means that you'll be actively changing your habits. If you're not stretching yourself a little bit, you'll just eat the way that you always have, and you'll have the weight that you have right now. So you've got to define for yourself what the goal is. And then you've got to have some idea ahead of time of what will create that. And this is where in other podcasts, I've talked about counting the amount of overeats that adds up to weight loss for you. So for me, I know if I'm going to lose, between 0.5 to maybe even a little bit over 1 pound a week, I've got to keep my overeats to 2 or less. It depends on how much I overeat. And so that has played out many, many weeks in a row. And I have good evidence that as long as I can keep my overeats to 2 or less, I'll lose weight. So here you are. You've defined your goal. You know what you're going for. You have some way of tracking data. I recommend tracking your overeats. Okay. So then in the course of a day, you're going to have all kinds of thoughts about eating. Maybe you'll have an urge to snack, and you'll be aware of that urge. You've got to make the decision whether or not to snack. And hopefully you have good, solid guidelines for you that work with this form of intuitive eating that I teach, which is that we don't eat unless we're physically hungry. So you're going to manage your mind out and check the thought, I want to snack. Okay, am I hungry? And then you're going to go into your body. You're going to locate the relative hunger in your stomach, and you're going to make a decision. So persistent, let's say you do that and you're like, nope, I'm not going to snack. I'm not hungry yet. It makes sense. I'm not hungry. This is just a habit, I think, of eating. Let's say in the middle of the day between lunch and dinner when I'm feeling tired. And let's say you just keep working, and then you start to have persistent thoughts about snacking. This is where selective ignoring would come in. Now, there's ways of selective ignoring that make it easy and ways of selective ignoring that make it hard. So what do I mean when I say selective ignoring? What I mean is you're not going to give the thought, I want a snack, the second, third, fourth, fifth time you think it, any more attention once you've decided that you're not eating. Maybe you can just say, I've already decided on this, or I'm not going to be rethinking about this again. And you can make it easier for you to selectively ignore by setting up your environment to make it easier. So I think the hard way of doing this, if you notice you're just having a ton of urges to snack, for example, Sitting there and continuing to drive yourself at your desk when you know you're tired and just fighting those urges, like getting pissed that you keep thinking about snacking. Think about how much attention you're giving that thought. That is not selective ignoring. That is giving a ton of negative attention to a thought to eat. Selective ignoring is the opposite. Selective ignoring is literally detaching your attention from the thought. And it's going to be like a bee buzzing in your ear. Selective ignoring is like the person at the party, the barbecue, who just lets the bee kind of buzz around their ear and they're not reactive. They don't do anything about it. The one who gives it negative attention, that bee, is the one who freaks out and starts swatting the bee and starts running around the yard. And now the bee is chasing them. Okay, that's the opposite of selective ignoring. And the reason why this is so important is because the attention that you give certain thoughts, whether it's positive or negative attention, tells your brain of its importance. And this is where I see so many of my clients and the members sort of make it much harder for themselves. They think that they're doing a good, like diligent effort if they start really like doubling down and getting real strict with their urges and fighting their urges. They always write in the group about this. I'm fighting urges and it's a battle. And whenever I hear that, I'm like, oh, they need selective ignoring. I want to give you another example of what this looks like. I learned this skill when I taught 8th grade US history. There was always, there's always one student in the classroom who loves to get negative attention from the teacher. They're always like shouting out or not raising their hand or getting up from their seat or whatever. And I had to learn the hard way that giving that student my attention actually made all the attention in the classroom go to that negative behavior. And if you do this with urges to eat or fighting thoughts to eat or whatever with your weight loss, you're going to create the same kind of toxic environment in your head. One that is like a war zone, one that's like battling, one that is really hard, one of white knuckling. It does not have to be this way. Instead, I want you to do what I learned how to do, which is giving a boundary, number one, and then literally turning your back on the thought and getting busy and on with the business of life at hand that you do want to give your attention to. So, for example, in my classroom, what this looked like is if the student was like jumping out of his seat, let's say, I would just say strike 1, 2, or 3. Those were my classroom rules. You get to strike 3 or you have a detention, you stay after. So I would just say 1, I'd say that's 2, and I'd say that's 3. And usually if they made it to 3, they would want to say something. They would want to argue with me about getting the detention. And there was a specialist in classroom management who helped me with this. And they said, just turn your back after you give them the 3. And I said, well, that student is going to like pull a face at me or, be disrespectful in some way. And they said, well, don't worry about it. Like, let them have that little win. Just keep your power and turn your back and move on with it. And if it continued, I had things that I could do disciplinary wise, but you can do in this analogy back to like persistent thoughts of urges to overeat or eat when you're not hungry. If the urge keeps coming back, I want you to just say like, I will revisit this in an hour and see if I'm still hungry. You could say that. There's your boundary. That's akin to my strike 1, strike 2, strike 3, right? And then the part where if it keeps coming up, I want you to kind of move your body or move your environment, change your environment in some way to make ignoring this thought much easier. So sometimes I find, like in the example of snacking, in the afternoon, sometimes I get urges to snack, although I don't snack anymore. But I know if I have an urge to snack or thoughts of food, it's because I've got something hard to do, maybe that I'm not sure how to do it, or it feels hard to get started or something like that. Um, and I just really need like a pep talk. Like, come on, like, let's just get started. Like, let's just do the first thing, the easiest thing. So, positive self talk to help you with actually what's going on, that your urge is giving you a clue that what it's really about is like, I need a pep talk from myself. Maybe sometimes it's like, I need a break from my desk. And I do what's called a pushback. And I turn my chair around away from my desk and I get up from my desk and I walk away. I usually give myself about 3 minutes for this. I might go change the laundry. I might go in my gym and do some stretches, do some deep breathing. But I definitely get out of my office. Sometimes just that change of environment helps you ignore those thoughts. Sometimes when I come back, I'll turn on Spotify and just play music. And the music gives my mind something to kind of like attach itself to that makes it forget about the thought to eat. It's kind of like if you've ever had kids and they're toddlers and they're in the shopping cart at the checkout, when they see all those snacks or gum or candy, and they like latch on to it. And, as a mom, that was always like so dicey. I eventually learned before we would even go to Target, I would say, you all can pick out one thing, and whatever I would give them a choice of, I was okay with. But I would say, we don't pick that out when we're checking out. Like you can have it in your hand in the cart. So this was like choosing on purpose and anticipating when it would get hard for my son and giving him options. And this is what you can do for yourself. Like at this point, like for me, just being somebody who does not need to snack between meals, I just say, no, we don't snack. And that's my selective ignoring. And then I know if I have any more thoughts about it, I've got to attend to some other need. And my job is to figure out what that is. So you can go down two paths with thinking that drives overeating. One is to give it a lot of negative attention where you make your weight loss take longer and feel harder than it has to. And the other path you can go down is selective ignoring, where it's like a bee buzzing in your ear and you give a boundary. You just say, this is just something we don't do, or I'll check back in an hour, or what is this really about? If it's not about food. Okay. And then you just ignore it. It's just a no. And the thing about weight loss is that successful weight loss requires you to be able to develop a practice of saying no to yourself over and over again. Strengthening your muscle of the not right now response and like suspending your in the moment urges for food is critical. What it does when you develop that practice of saying no to yourself over and over again in a kind way, not in a restrictive way, but in a way that is like, we don't eat unintentionally. We always eat in a way that serves my goals. And so, of course, if you're hungry, you can eat, right? That's not what I'm talking about. But if you have an urge to keep eating your dinner past enough because it tastes so good, it's like, here's what I say to selectively ignore that thought. I say, of course, my food tastes good. That's not even an interesting question anymore. I don't use food tasting good as a reason to overeat it. It requires discernment, right? So selective ignoring is your new superpower practice that is going to help you increase your reputation with yourself because you're able to ignore automatic thoughts that drive overeating when they don't serve you. And that selective ignoring will make your weight loss take less time and feel so much easier when you ignore the parts of life that are about things that you don't want. So if you're having problems with selectively ignoring urges to eat, I know it's because you haven't really gotten clear that any bite of food eaten when you are not hungry and or eaten past when you've had enough is not what you want. It just isn't. If you want to be at your natural weight, a goal weight that feels good to you, and that involves losing weight from where you are now, you've got to get on board with that. And here's the best part. When you're able to selectively ignore urges to overeat, you start to create room in your life because you've ignored that whole thing that can happen, that whole fight about overeating, and you just drop the fight because you've ignored it. You start to turn your attention. Like, think about what ignoring is. You just turn your attention to other things. It's like, oh, what's there? If I give up my fight against overeating, what else is there for me? Well, there's a whole world there for you of tons of things that you do want that are waiting to come into your life when you drop the agenda to overeat. And this is part of the future self that you are inviting in and calling in as you learn how to lose weight. It's really exciting. And it's kind of like a doorway. Selective ignoring opens a door for more things that you do want to come into your life. Like, so often, and I'm going to leave you with this. So often people say to me, I just want to be done with my struggle against food. I just want to be done and prove to myself I can lose this weight once and for all. And yeah, like when you're done with certain things, like, you know that something else is going to come in and take up all that bandwidth that you've been giving to like fight your fight against food. And selective ignoring is the doorway that lets all that in. And it's so great because with ignoring, there's really no like overworking to it. You just ignore it. You just turn your attention away from it. There's nothing really that you need to do or add or work at. It's just a change of focus. I'll leave you with one last metaphor. Speaking of Target with my kids when they were little, my oldest was really good at temper tantrums at Target, especially if we ever went by the toy aisle or the Lego aisle. Oh my gosh. So when he was older, of course, he would be walking with me, and he would sometimes throw himself down on the ground, which was horrifying for me. And I would complain. And of course, some brilliant mommy that was further along than me just said, you got to just ignore him. Like, the more you plead with him, the more you give him attention, the more you try to like rationalize with him and tell him that he's being bad, like the more he's going to dig in because he has your attention and he knows he needs your attention for you to say yes to what he wants. So he'll do whatever is necessary to keep your attention. So you got to just completely ignore him. And I was like, how am I going to do that? Like, he is screaming his head off, laying on the ground. And I did it. Like, one day I was just like, I could feel my energetic attachments just like recoil back into my body. And I was watching him there screaming, having a temper tantrum on the floor. And I just stepped over him and I walked away. And of course, like, he didn't know, but I was like 4 rows down, like watching him where he couldn't see me, make sure he was okay. But it was kind of like the energy of, oh, who is this kid? I don't know whose kid this is. I'm just going to walk by him. And then eventually, like he was like looking around like, wait, where'd she go? And of course he stopped crying because he didn't have my attention anymore. He was ignored. Like ignoring cuts off the fuel for the fight. And this is what I mean about selective ignoring your urges to eat past enough and overeat. Like just move your attention away from them. Now, I just want to caution you. I'm not telling you to not do your discovery worksheets or like write about in your journal what happened if you had an overeat, right? Like I'm not saying to throw away your tools, but a lot of times what y'all do is you misuse the tools that I give you to help you lose weight by like getting into a war with them because you're making yourself wrong because you don't always act in accordance to your intentions. And I just want to remind you, weight loss is an imperfect process with an imperfect human being trying to change her habits. We have to give ourselves a ton of grace. I would much rather have you learn how to support yourself with grace and loving kindness and unconditional positive self-regard of you, even in your imperfect moments. Even that is ignoring any kind of perceived imperfect action that we take, right? Like I could say, I'm such a fuck up for my overeat with pizza again. Why do I keep doing this? Notice that all that does is ask for a self-loathing answer. We can ignore that relatively by just saying, I know I'm going to journal about why this happened again. And I'm committed to finding an answer. So you see how you turned your attention to finding an answer rather than giving the overeat negative attention. Okay. So it's a subtlety. Don't use the tools for weight loss against yourself by using them as a weapon or weaponizing them against your actions, your perceived imperfect actions around weight loss. So I hope that I have enticed you with maybe an underdeveloped practice of selective ignoring, of thinking that drives overeating. And when you shift your focus, your work is to start paying attention to what you do want. You know, whether that's like some pushbacks from your desk during the day or finding some truly like sustainable ways of relaxing after dinner instead of just overeating because you think it helps you relax after dinner, right? I don't know what it is for you, but explore, experiment, see how you find it, and bring any of your comments or questions or ahas or takeaways over to Instagram. You can find me at Thrive in Midlife on the episode 26 post. And just let me know how you found the episode or feel free to say hi. Love talking to you guys over there. Thanks for joining me. Stay focused and so long. Hey, if this episode was helpful, then let's connect. Visit hbeardsley.com/subscribe. That's hbeardsley.com/subscribe. You'll get a gift from me, exclusive subscriber content, and advanced notice of in-person events.